folks, Rich here from the rcnetwork.com, and today it's time for another Wrenching with Rich episode. Now, in this episode, this is not going to be a highly produced video, but in the end, we're going to go through my Tekno DB48 right here. Now, it's not an official production vehicle. It's something that I've kind of made up on my own, kind of mixing some of the parts from Tekno and adding a cage on here to make it look like a rock racer. So that makes a pretty good full suspension rig. So both front independent suspension and rear independent suspension. So I just finished a race out at Cherry Valley for a U4RC race, and now it's time to kind of go through the vehicle and see, you know, if anything broke, if anything bent, if I'm having any issues anywhere before I go to the next race. So in this video, we're just going to be kind of tearing down the truck and looking for things that I like to look for just to prevent a failure at the next race. So also, we're going to be installing quite a few upgrades from Tekno as well, just to beef up some areas that I like to beef up. One of them being all of the hinge pin holders for this platform, and then also all of the shock parts. We're going to be adding quite a bit of aluminum shock parts, including the caps and the knurled adjusters, the bottom caps. Just don't want to have any failures with the shocks. So now the first thing I did was I took this outside and actually hooked up my air compressor, got this thing completely blown down as much as I could that was at least loose on it, but you're still going to see some dirt and some stuff inside of here. Now, as far as my vehicles, I like to rebuild the shocks after every race. It's just nice to have nice plush suspension that has fresh shock fluid in them. So I don't really rebuild all of the differentials every race, but I'll definitely check them to make sure that they're running properly and that they're smooth. So with that, let's go ahead and start taking a look at the DB48 here. The body, I kind of have it rigged up with zip ties right now, but the body comes off pretty easily and you're able to get to the chassis without taking out like 1,500 screws like the Losi Rock Ray, if you happen to have one of those. So pretty much there's the chassis right there. The first thing I like to do is to go ahead and give the tires a spin. Now this is a open differential, both front, center, and rear. So you will have, you know, the typical offset spinning right there. So same thing with the rear. I do have a no locked differentials in this rig. I like to have pretty much open differentials, but I like to give it a spin just to see if there's anything bent or binding on the driveline. And right here you're seeing everything's pretty smooth, so no issues with the driveline that I can see. It seems that all the bearings are pretty much smooth, but we're going to go through each point of this vehicle and just kind of give it a cleanup, dust it off, and make sure everything's running good. I pulled the wheels and tires off now and just kind of doing a quick inspection of everything. Now I like to go ahead and rotate things once again. Right here, taking the center diff and kind of rotating through the drive line. Also take the steering and kind of go through the steering as well, just to see that everything is functioning and there's no bent parts like turnbuckles. Now what I like to do with the turnbuckles is I like to go ahead and take them and actually just give them a little spin like this. You can tell that one is a perfectly straight turnbuckle, hasn't bent or anything. Now if we rotate here to the rear, I have the rear one right here, and this one's kind of bound up a little bit. You can kind of see there's an arc to it. It's actually moving back and forth. This thing is actually kind of seed a little bit right here. So we're going to have to take a look at that one and see if it's just bent or if it just needed to be replaced. So I think it's time to go ahead and take the shocks off and make sure everything is functioning correctly with the suspension arms, and I'm getting full travel of all the suspension. Alright, so shocks are off, and I went ahead and kind of just did a quick inspect on the shocks. You can tell I had a little bit of leakage right there, so hopefully those upgrade parts, the aluminum shock caps and whatnot, will kind of fix that issue. I'll have to inspect to see exactly why that leaked. It looks like it was leaking out of the bleeder hole. So I'm going to be actually building up the new shock caps with an emulsion style. So it won't actually have a bladder inside, and we'll be able to go ahead and get a little bit better setup with the new shock caps. So that should be a nice little addition to this DB48. Now let's go on to the suspension arms, and we're just going to go ahead and test them for their travel to make sure they're just dropping straight down to the ground, that there's nothing kind of binding on them. There's a little bit of stiction right now, so that might be just the dirt and whatnot that's kind of caught on this rig. I'll give it another blow down now that I have the wheels and the shocks off, just to make sure I get every last bit of dirt off of it, and then I'll give it a good wipe down, just with a good like microfiber cloth. So right there, the rear sounds a lot better, a little squeaky, but it seems like it's functioning. And then do the side to side movement, I'm not getting anything forward or aft, and it seems to be pretty good. So no issues with those. And like I said, we are going to be removing all of these plastic suspension holders, upgrading it to the aluminum versions. It really doesn't need it, but I like to have just solid points of contact for the bulkheads. So the bulkheads go through quite a bit of abuse on U4, and hopefully that will make this thing a little bit better. Alright, so I got my shock station all set up here. Went ahead and removed the spring perches and then also the springs from the shocks, and then I just referred to the owner's manual that actually gave me the stock CST weight of the oil. I always have a hard time remembering that, and always have your owner's manual on hand. It just helps to remind you things. So right here, 350 weight in the rear, in the front, and then 200 weight in the rear. So it'll give a good blend there, and I actually do like that combination out on the track. So it converts to 20 weight for the rear and 30 weight for the front in the team associated brand of fluids. So now, like I said, I'm going to be upgrading these things to an emulsion style shock. So I picked up the vented aluminum caps right here. Also picked up the knurled adjusters in aluminum, and then finally the bottom caps in aluminum. Now, certain models of Teknos do come with these parts, like the EP48.4, but in the short course truck it does not. Price is a little bit lower on the short course truck, so it kind of dictates the amount of upgrades that you get in the vehicle. And honestly, a short course truck really doesn't need the upgrades, but since I've been doing all of these heavier weight items on my DB48, it definitely needs it. So I'm going to go ahead and upgrade those as we flush the shocks, and we also want to double check all of the shock shafts to make sure that there's no bent ones. These are pretty stout 4mm shock shafts, so I doubt they'll ever bend, but just want to check the cycle once they're actually disassembled and we're putting on some of the upgrades. Now this next part here, I'm going to go ahead and remove the bottom eyelet. I got my shock shaft pliers right there, just holding the shock shaft so it doesn't mar the finish. I'm going to go ahead and twist off these bottom eyelets because we do have to replace those bottom caps. So we do need this off, and you can kind of see here all the dirt and stuff that kind of really gets into there that doesn't make for good suspension travel. So we're going to clean all that up as well. And then we're also going to remove the boots right here, just to get to that bottom cap, which is a plastic cap right there. So we're going to be replacing that with the aluminum version that I picked up. So pretty nice. And then you can also kind of cycle this to see, if you have any bent shock shafts, which I'm definitely not seeing. These are pretty stout 4mm shock shafts. So pretty nice. And I like to keep all my parts kind of in order here, especially rear and front. So there's nothing that gets mixed up. Boot will probably just clean up a little bit just to make sure there's no excess dirt in there. Now it's time to go ahead and dump these shocks. Got a little clear container here so we can really see what comes out of these, if there's any leakage on the bottom. And what I like about this, let's see if I have all my parts here. Tekno has a pretty cool little deal here where you can actually put this into the top cap, and then the bottom cap, if you happen to have these guys, has a nice little 17 mil deal right there. This goes in right here, and then you can easily turn off the shock cap. So it's a cool little hidden trick on the Tekno tools to work on your Tekno shocks. So we're going to go ahead and pull these off. And I built these non-vented. So the way Tekno shocks are is they actually, the bladder is so thick it actually gets sucked into the shock button. You have to kind of remove it there. You kind of see it pop right off. So good quality on these things. But we're no longer going to use those, and let's go ahead and see what fluid we get out of this thing. Pretty clear, not too bad. There we go. Now I've went ahead and set up my little shock stand right there from Proline, and these happen to be the perfect size to go ahead, and I have a rag underneath there. I'm going to go ahead and set this upside down to let all the excess kind of come out. And you can kind of give this a little, ream in there to get as much of the shock fluid out. That'll let everything come out, and you should be set to go to rebuild those things. So I'm going to go ahead and complete this for all the rest of them. So now as I look at the shock fluid that actually came out, you can kind of see that there's no dirt in there. So that's a very good sign. That means that there wasn't any leaking or any dirt that kind of broke into the shock. So that's a good thing. As far as the leaking that I noticed, that may have just been excess from when I built it, but there was no missing shock fluid or any seals that were broke. So it was just a little extra spillage on the initial build. So now taking a look at one of the upgraded shocks, went ahead and added the bottom cap right there. And then also the knurled adjuster is all aluminum now. Should be a strong hold. And then once we add on the aluminum shock cap, we should have a pretty solid shock now for pretty much any type of use. So this is a very, very nice shock once it is upgraded past the SCT 410.3 version. Now one thing that I want to note is on the shock shaft pliers from Tekno, they have that 12mm slot there. So now you can actually use this to tighten down that bottom cap, which is pretty nice. They've thought of almost everything with these shock shaft pliers to help you build your Tekno shocks. So I got one built with the new shock cap, the new knurled adjuster, the new aluminum bottom cap, and it looks pretty good. I mean, the feel of these are just absolutely smooth and perfect. Now I did build these emulsion style from the EB48.4 owner's manual. That actually gives the best description of how to build them. So let's go ahead and build up one of the front shocks emulsion style using the EB48.4 instructions. So first off, we're going to go ahead and grab this deal right here. We have the shock oil pretty much all the way to the top. It's pretty much there's no like concaveness to it, and it's ready for the shock cap now. So pretty much the instructions say to go ahead and put on the shock cap with the O-ring inside of there. And we're going to go ahead and put this on and screw it all the way down. We're not going to worry about bleeding it yet. That'll come in a little bit later step here. But emulsion style, we want to go ahead and screw the cap all the way on. Like this, keeping this at kind of like a 45-degree angle as we do that, in case any oil happens to peek out of it. So we're going to go ahead and lock that down. And like I said, you can use your shock shaft pliers and also your wheel wrench to just make sure that's all the way tight. Now you may have a little bit that leaks out of the little bleeder hole right there. That's okay, you can just wipe that up if you need to. And then what we're going to be watching is this hole up here, which is the actual vented style or the emulsion style little bleeder cap. So this one's now sealed with the actual threads. This is the one we want to pay attention to now. So I'm going to go ahead and put a rag down below, and I'm going to go ahead and cycle the shock shaft all the way up until we have some oil just peek right on out of it. As you see there, a little bit of oil just comes out, and that's good. We're we're going to go and wipe that off. Make sure there's no oil peeking inside of there. Now we're going to take the screw that I prepared with the tiny little O-ring, the tiniest O-ring that you can imagine. That thing is just absolutely teeny tiny on there, and we're going to go ahead and screw that into the actual bleeder hole. And don't want to over tighten that. So now all we're going to do is go ahead and cycle the shock shaft about 30 times vigorously, and you'll listen to some nice music while I do this. Perfect, we're all done now, and now what we're going to do is go ahead and remove that bleeder screw and take this out. You notice I cycled the shock shaft all the way down, and now we're just going to cycle it back up again. Lots of air and some oil will spill out, so be prepared. Let's get to the very top. You can kind of see the oil with all the excess air bubbles and whatnot. Now emulsion style emulsion style actually is a blend of air and oil. It gives a little bit better feel and very fluid movement. Now we're going to go ahead and wipe off the actual screw there, and then we're going to go ahead and screw this back in to the shock. Focus! There we go. And screwing this all the way back in. Not too tight, just a nice snug. We're all set. So now we have a nice, smooth feeling shock. This is beautiful. Now it's time to go ahead and put on the spring and the perch. We're all done. All 4 shocks are done, so time to move on to some of the other upgrades and cleaning up all of the little bits and pieces for the suspension and making sure everything is running smooth. What's so nice about the Teknos is 5 screws and you have the whole rear section of the vehicle off. So pretty much just 4 screws on the underside and then 1 button head screw on the upper shock, or I'm sorry, upper chassis brace. So pretty much everything comes clean. You can kind of see some dirt buildup down here on right underneath the rear differential. So we're gonna have to look into that. That was probably just grease that had kind of spattered out from the seam that's actually on the underside of the differential, and this will give us a chance to not only replace those hinge pin holders, I'm going to keep the same geometry, but also clean up all the bits and pieces on these. We'll take off the hexes as well and kind of clean up the bearings, make sure they're spinning right. And as you see here, I'm just spinning one of the wheel hexes and everything is very, very smooth. So that's a good sign. Just time to clean up things, make sure we're ready for the race. Alright, so I went ahead and cleaned up this side of the actual rear bulkhead and also installed the new hinge pin braces. This is the CNC aluminum versions, both front and rear of the rear section, so the C and D block. Very nice, and they take the same pills that the stock ones did. So take a look at the stock ones. They're just standard plastic ones. Still pretty decent. I mean, they're pretty lightweight and they're pretty thick. So I don't think there's going to be an issue with these in a normal short course truck, but the way I'm running it, it's nice to have the aluminum ones here just to give me a little bit of peace of mind and a little bit more durability. So I went ahead and installed those. Those were easy, just 2 screws on each side. Changed the pills out to make sure that they match up the stock configuration, which I do like. The stock geometry is very nice on this rig. So now we're going to go ahead and clean up this side, and I'll show you kind of the way I do it. Now, you may not need to do this after every time you run. A simple blow off will get you going, but you can see here this is all pretty smooth still. So, but I do want to clean off some of the dirt and debris, especially around the bearings and then also the CVD, just to check for any wear and that type of stuff. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take off this 12mm hex, and then also remove this turnbuckle so we can kind of explode everything out and we can get to all the internal pieces of this rear bulkhead here. And there we go. Just 2 screws pretty much, and you can explode everything out. This thing will just flop open. You can take the CVD, and the CVD will just pop right on out of the bearing race right there. It's a little stuck, but I actually use red Loctite on this rig to make sure I don't lose a wheel. That's the worst thing to do in a race, is to lose a wheel. So need to go ahead and fire that up with just like a aim and flame, just to burn off some of the old red Loctite, clean that up for the next application of red Loctite. So you can see there's quite a bit of dirt and debris in there, so we're going to clean that up. We're also going to clean up the bearing faces right there, just to make sure it's all nice and neat. Same thing with the outer portion, and then clean up all the inside of the A-arms right there to make it look like this one. It looks all brand new. So the way I clean it after I've blown it off with an air compressor, just any kind of degreaser you have. This is from Method. I mean, I've used 409, I've used Windex, pretty much anything that I have laying around, I just use it. Simple Green works good too. And then just a simple microfiber cloth. Spray it on the cloth and not on the vehicle, just to get everything kind of damp and wet. And then you just start rubbing on it and just get this thing all cleaned up. You want to make sure everything, all these little nooks and crannies are clean, and just make sure that everything's ready for that next race or that next bash session if that's what you do. So, but right here, just get all inside these little spots and nooks and crannies, and we're going to go ahead and clean up the bearing races right there. You can kind of see how dirty that is. Just a simple pass over with the microfiber. I actually use the dry portion of the cloth for those. We'll flip it to this side. Same thing. You can kind of see the glistening of the silver now, instead of all that dirt and grime that was on there. Let's clean up the turnbuckle, and then we'll turn our attention back to that CVD to get it all cleaned up. You can kind of see that the underside is all nice and clean now. Cleaned it up actually earlier, so. And then those new aluminum hinge pin holders are quite nice. Going to give a lot of durability and a strong hold for these bulkheads. Alright, so let's go ahead and get the CVD all cleaned up and done. I'm not going to tear it down and do like a full rebuild, but what I am going to do is just go ahead and try and get some of the dirt out of here as best I can, and we're just going to pack it full of grease again, just to make sure it's ready for the next race and stays all nice and clean in there. I don't feel any grime as I maneuver it around. If you did, you definitely want to go ahead and pop it all apart and then really clean it meticulously. But I think this will be good for the next race at least, or maybe the next couple of races. As I'm focusing, there we go. So yeah, I'm not hearing too much in there. So just going to go ahead and take some simple black grease right here. Tons of these things laying around, and going to go ahead and squirt that into there. Healthy little coating in there, just like that. And now I'm going to use my finger just to kind of go around in a circle here, spreading it in, kind of pack it in there. There we go. That one is all ready to go. It's all nice and packed in there, all nice and neat and lubricated for the next race. And this all looks good. Gonna clean off where the bearing sits. There we go. And now time to button this all back up. Now remember, when you do put the 12mm hex back in, you do want to make sure that you re-loctite it. So you don't want those things to fall off, because that's almost as bad as losing a wheel. So this is just a matter of flipping this back in, getting everything to line back up. All back together now. Everything's moving nice and freely. Give it a quick spin. Ah, nice and smooth. So we're going to set this aside, and now we're going to turn our attention to the center differential. Got quite a bit of just buildup in there, and it may have splattered a little bit. I think I'm running 500,000 weight in there. I didn't quite get all of it off when I originally built it, so we're going to go ahead and pull the center diff now, because if we mount the rear bulkhead with the drive shaft, it's kind of tough to get that out. So we're going to do it now, pull it out, drop it back in, and then add the rear bulkhead back into this. And that way we can kind of clean down into here where you can kind of see some spatter marks and whatnot, and just clean this thing all up. Right about 6 screws to get this center differential out, and like I said, I put 500,000 in here. It feels really smooth still. I mean, you can definitely feel the pressure of the 500,000 weight oil, but right now we're just going to clean up all the debris, try and get the bearings as free as possible. And this thing is still spinning very freely, so no need to disassemble this. This was a freshly built differential and has, I think, 3 battery packs on this differential. So clean up, reinstall, and put on the rear bulkhead. We'll move on to the front. So as I'm cleaning up the center differential, I like to use, and this sounds stupid, but Q-tips. It actually, you can get into these little out drives right here and really kind of get into the nooks and crannies that you couldn't with like just a rag. So this will help just keep some of the debris out, keep it all nice and clean as well as I get cotton everywhere. And then just flip it over the other side. You can kind of see there all the dirt and grime that's in there. But once you clean it up, it looks pretty good. And it'll keep less buildup as you keep driving it and keep using this thing. So right there you can kind of see it's a lot cleaner now, and it'll prevent additional buildup as you drive it more and more. Alright, so as you can see here, the rear bulkhead is back on, the drive shaft, the center differential, all nice and cleaned up. Everything's been prepped now for the race as far as the rear end of this. I have some work to do on the front end, so let me get to it, and I'll be right back. All right, so fast forward a little bit of time there, and I've got everything all buttoned up on the front end of the vehicle now. It's all ready to pretty much race. Even got the wheels and tires back on. You can really see all of the quality parts that went into this kind of quick little wrenching with Rich upgrade segment for my DB48 from Tekno RC. Now this thing's just been a pleasure to kind of upgrade and add just a couple of bells and whistles as far as the shock caps, and then also all of the blocks. So the A, B, C, and D block are now all aluminum. Gives me a little bit of an advantage as far as durability when I'm out on the rocks. Well guys, that is it. That is my quick little upgrade video right here, a little wrenching with Rich segment to get me on my way for the next race. That's actually tomorrow morning. So got this thing all buttoned up and just really ready to race this thing and see how it performs once again. Well guys, that is it for now. If you have any comments or questions about this video, feel free to post it on down below. And as always, thumbs up and subscribe. That's it for now guys. Over now.